welcome to season 14 of Drink It In the podcast. This season is called Behind the Pages, where I get to interview these amazing authors. I have someone very unique today. I have Devorah Esther. She's going to tell us more about her work. But for all those history buffs, stay tuned. You are going to love this and be mesmerized, I think, with this conversation. Because when I had my first conversation with Devorah, I also was mesmerized with all this information. I myself am not a history buff, but it still hit me strong. So even if you don't like history, stay tuned. And let me introduce Devorah Esther. Please take it away and tell everybody where you're from and some background so that everyone can understand what ignited you to write the books that you write.
So, as you said, my name is Devorah Esther Ivel Colon, which Ivel is Levi, right to left. And Colon, yeah, I know. Like, and until you see it, it's like, oh my gosh, how did I not see it? And in the Spanish, we take both our father and our mother's name. So Ivel is my father's name, which is Levi, and it traces all the way back to Spain. And Colon, which is on my mother's side, actually comes from none other than Cristobal Colon, which is known as Christopher Columbus. So he's somebody that, obviously is getting a lot of press throughout the years, right? His legacy probably is a case study for, espionage at its highest level, because till this day, we're still debating, what happened, what didn't. Our involvement, obviously, as one of his descendants. I think some people, as far as like even the story of the Spanish Inquisition and the expulsion, I think that they think come, July 31st, 1492, it's over, right? And I think that what people are so shocked to find out is that was just the beginning. And I think that if I had a magic wand to bring all of the main characters back, like I would love to hear what their insight is, how far we've gotten, where are they shocked that we still, in some ways, still questioning the history, what happened. So that's, my involvement with the Converso movement and the Anusim. And I think that we see a lot of this talk of people coming back from Spain, right? This has been like a big topic in the last few years. And there's been an explosion of people. But what's so crazy, it's probably one of the fastest growing demographics within Am Yisrael, and so little is known about them. And I think that it's really important that we do dig in a little deeper into the history, because this history is really tied to the Geulah. You're talking about a portion of the remnant of Shevet Yehuda, which, as we all know, is where the Davidic dynasty, the Mashiach, would come from. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us. I mean, we're all looking for the Geulah to come, and we're looking for ways to bring that. This is no less part of all of that. So it's very interesting, and it's been my honor and pleasure that Hashem has allowed me to be part of it in whatever way.
So can I ask you, Devorah Esther, so growing up, you weren't knowledgeable about this heritage of yours, were you?
What's really funny is that, much like, everything else, this is an evolution, even in information. It's funny how Hashem sets you up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hashem makes this setup. And I didn't realize at the time, but my journey really began at the age of 5 when I asked my grandmother a question that I thought was really innocuous, which is, tell me about your grandmother. And instead of her, saying, oh, she was so wonderful and she this and that, she shut me down. And there was a face as almost if I had asked something that I should not have asked. And, as you get older and you start to know people a little bit better and your understanding of life is evolving, I realized that, I just kept going back to that reaction. I would try to bring it up again in different ways, and it would always be the same reaction. And this was very out of character for my grandmother in particular, because she was very much a straight shooter. You asked her a question, you knew exactly how she felt. This was always a tap dance. And for people who come from this background, they will say, I want to say without exception, it's always like talking to, a poet, right? Like they tell you what they want to tell you in a dance around. And so you've always got to learn how to read between the lines. You don't know when they're going to start or stop. And it's always like you have to thread together all of the things that they're saying to you. But I didn't realize at the time, at 5 years old, Hashem just did not let me let it go. And he had literally planted in a seed within me. And I think that even before I knew what Emunah and Bitachon was, I was already going to be on this journey, and everything in my life led up to, getting the experience to do this job of, uncovering the history.
Wow. Now, when you were in school as a young girl, were you interested in history? Were you interested in writing? Were you like, did this, or this was like, this is like an epiphany that you kept on going back to that 5-year-old conversation that you had with your grandma?
I want to say, and maybe people who've been adopted probably feel this way.
Mm-hmm.
When you don't have an identity, right? Like I only knew my grandmother, I knew, she had a brother. You almost feel like, there's this huge gap missing. And again, for whatever reason, Hashem made it was so strong. It was like a deep longing, but it was like living life like you had woken up from amnesia. Like you
Mm-hmm.
just know everything that's happening now and forward. You don't know your past. You don't know anything. And I think for a lot of people, the issue of identity, it almost comes down to a basic necessity, right? When you don't know who you are, that becomes such a dangerous thing because there are so many people who will come in and tell you who they think you should be. And so that becomes a very, dangerous place to be. Not to mention that you yourself want to make an identity, so you can go through all kinds of paths. And thankfully, I never got into a bad path, but certainly, there was a deep longing there to kind of know who I was, and it was something that I just could not shake. So, definitely growing up, even in school, it was very difficult. When you go, which by the way, I wasn't even allowed too many times to go over to a friend's house, but on the rare occasion that I was, and that you see their family dynamic, and ours was just so different. I didn't know who, my grandmother's mother was. I didn't see pictures of anyone outside of our immediate. There was like no past pictures. I actually thought that we were in witness protection program for a really long time. I cannot tell you how long. I thought we were a witness protection program, and there was like, and I'm sure like a lot of people will probably relate to this when you're a kid. And I'm going to date myself now because there was no cell phones at that time, right? So there was a stationary phone, and sometimes there would be like late night conversations that my mom would have with whoever. And from time to time, I would hear something about Puerto Rico, which just wasn't in the forefront of our life. Like I didn't know what Puerto Rico was. Once in a while, look at this, like Christopher Columbus would come up. It had no meaning to me at the time. Not even when I was in school. Don't ask me why. And then there was a time I thought maybe we're Italian. I mean, I just like didn't know. I just didn't know. So, it's so crazy for me to think like how unaware I was, especially given who I found out like who my family was, and just how closely involved we were in this whole Spanish Inquisition and the post expulsion. And so, it was just like mind boggling that you could come momish right from the heart of all of this and have been kept in the dark. But I'm really fortunate that Hashem had other plans and he really did intervene. It's funny. The story of the survival of the Conversos is spectacular, but within that, Hashem has woven, he's like the perfect author, right? We're speaking of author. A lot of times is this story, and then there's a greater story in the background, right? Which for me, the Conversos were the story in the background. But it was that journey between Hashem and I that really is the main story, right? And so I think that when you hit that stride with Hashem, it's a really special thing. And I know it's a really fortunate if you can hit that stride with Hashem, that out of all of the challenges that you've been through, and you can still, like we say, ride or die with Hashem. I mean, that's something, and the journey itself, it's just been nothing less than spectacular. And I always say that if I had been in the same time as Abraham Avinu, I could see 100% how he came to the conclusion that there is a Hashem in this world.
Mm.
I think there's some things you just can't explain. No matter how hard you try, it's not rational. There's some things that defy nature. And this, my experience was certainly one of them. So for me, I know unequivocally there's a Hashem, and he mamish is not only running the world, but everything that happens to you is so precise. He fascinates me. Hashem fascinates
Well,
me.
you're fascinating me, Devorah Esther, because I'm sure people are listening be like, okay, so tell us, Devorah Esther, tell us. So what was that journey? Take us through the journey if you can. How old were you when you had that, if I could call it, that Avram Avinu moment, like
Yeah.
because you referenced it, right? Take us through that. What were the things that happened up until then? And then obviously after you take us through, I'm definitely going to ask you your family's reaction to all of it. So
Yes.
I'm just planting the seed for that. And then like I'm just laying out the land for everybody's listening. And then after that, we got to get to how you wrote the book after all of that. So hold on to your seats, everybody. Here we go. Devorah Esther, go.
So what's really crazy, I think my life, for all intents and purposes, the life that I had built, the identity that I built, which let me tell you something, anyone that knows me, they know if there's a job to get done, Devorah Esther will get it done, right? It's going to get done. It's going to get executed. Like you can tell there's a lot of military precision in my blood, right?
Mm.
So, for me, I had really career wise risen up the ranks. I had been doing lobbying and I was getting positions even as a paralegal that I was being put on as the co-chair for government affairs. I mean, really like high level, big, big management positions. And all of a sudden, here comes Hashem, right, in the form of a dream. Now, mind you, where I'm from, if there were Jews, they weren't really obvious Jews, right? So they weren't from, it was not apparent, that they were Jews. They're probably very much assimilated. So there was very little exposure to Judaism in the conventional way that we know it, right? So I didn't live near a synagogue, like none of that. So all of a sudden, I started getting all of these back to back to back. It was like the summer of Jewish dreams.
Okay.
And I'm like,
Sounds like a movie or a song we should write.
it was insane. It was just insane. At the same time, like I'm at the height of my career, and it's like I'm really going places, and here comes Hashem, and he just puts the kibosh on all of that.
How old were
And
you at this time?
believe it or not, I was like 29, 30, and
And you're married at this time. Are you married by
I'm
the time?
married at this time, which honestly, again, here comes Hashem. I went to, at the time, when I was dating my husband and I went to his house for the first time, and he had like his wall, the staircase, and they put the pictures up there. He had his wall littered with like pictures from like as far back as the 1800s of his family. And here I am, momish. I must have like given like ayin hara. I'm surprised all the pictures didn't break because I was so jealous of the fact that he had this history, right? And it just became like it was always this, the minute you forget, boom, Hashem's going to come in and he's going to just nudge you one more time. And all of a sudden, it was the summer of dreams. By the time I ended up with, and mind you, I had grown up as an evangelical Christian. And so, the doctrine of that is there's the truth, the way, and the light is only one way, right? There's only one way to the Shemaim. It was a difficult decision to finally, I remember I couldn't take it anymore. Like the dreams were so vivid and they were, I'm waking up in the morning and I'm sweating. And I literally said to Hashem, Hashem, okay, I don't know what's going on with this Jewish thing, but if you want me to explore it, I will. But if I give up on Yoshka, it's your fault. So please don't tell me when I get to the Shemaim I can't get in because I was perfectly fine, right? Thank God he did that. Right? And it was funny because even the dreams in itself, I don't know if anybody who's watching has ever had these dreams where you just knew information, even though it was never said. You just knew things about what you were seeing to be fact. And there was this one dream, and I actually, put it into the last Anusa, and it was like, I don't even know that I can call it a dream because the level of consciousness that was there. When I look back on that dream today, it literally was a fight between Yoshka and an ancestor of mine that was fighting. And at the end of that fight, he looked over to me and said, "Is this what you've been fighting for?" And in that moment, I woke up and I realized that Yoshka wasn't it. Now I wake up from this, and this became like the crossroads because I momish 100% the way that I know that you and I are talking, right? Like I knew that Yoshka wasn't it. The problem is, here it is. I've, built this whole identity, part of it, which involves a Christian identity. Like now I'm going to lose all of that. And so what do I do? Instead of running to embrace it, I run away from it and I go even deeper. And I really try to prove that this was just a dream, that what I had saw, I was making too much of it. And from there, I could never recuperate it. I only saw the errors. I only saw, um, the history. It was almost like I couldn't unsee. Hashem
Mm.
had given me eyes to see, and after that, the church and I broke up.
And what about your
And
husband?
it's funny. My husband, from a young age, had never really bought into the Christian faith.
Mm.
Never. So he, in all intents, like a lot of men sometimes, right? Like they go and they do whatever the wife does. So he was perfectly fine with leaving all that behind. He never thought that it made sense. The Christian
Mm.
religion to him never really made sense. Now, mind you, he grew up in Catholic school, and that which is very different from the evangelical side of things. He grew up in Catholic school, and and it's funny because his family, they own a funeral business, and one time a priest that used to be his teacher, when they found out that he had converted, he said, "We made a good Jewish boy out of you, didn't we?"
And then what about your parents?
So my father's passed away, and by the way, like my father had always known that he was Jewish. So he was the one that told me that the name is Levi. My mom, believe it or not, you would think she embraced this. I remember, when I had told her that I had finally converted, and she literally said, "You vindicated us." And the reason why she said that, we'll get into that a little later when we talk about the book. You know, well, both her, my grandmother, like I asked my grandmother, I finally did it. Do you still love me? And she says, "I love you even more now." You talk about trauma. Trauma is such a elusive thing to understand. I think sometimes we think we understand trauma, and we don't really fully understand, not even, the trauma that happens in our current life. When you talk about your life and then ancestral trauma that's brought on it, and a way of thinking, I don't think, very much like the indoctrination that you don't realize that you're so ingrained with. Trauma is something um, that there's no words for it. It's inexplicable. It's not rational. But for whatever reason, as they were seeing me fight to gain my identity, in that, there was something that was breaking within them. And I think that this happens a lot with Converso parents who have children who have made the journey back. I've had the privilege to speak to a lot of parents of children who have come back. I can't describe it, but there is this pain that I don't even think that they can articulate. And I think that even to speak about it sometimes goes too deep. Um, you don't really realize what was lost. The Spanish Inquisition, I think, again, for a lot of people, ended, July 31st, 1492. When you really start to understand the history, it's only then that you really realize what was stolen from Amistra. So it's been a journey of a lot of things, and it's really shaped, I think, the way that I look at the human experience. It's a really phenomenal thing to have this kind of insight into the life journey, if you will.
And is your mom still alive today?
She is still alive. She is still alive, and she's a total fangirl of the books, by the way.
Oh, that's great. Do you have any siblings?
So I have two brothers, not from the same father. My mother remarried. This journey, I have to tell you, um, I always say to everybody, sometimes you just have to live your truth, right? And I think in living my truth, this was my identity. That alone, I didn't have to fight with them. I didn't have to argue with them. They themselves, because this was their truth as well, right?
Right. I wanted to
They
say that for a second, if you don't
Yeah,
mind.
I mean, they
Because,
themselves know, but for whatever reason, I think that we think sometimes when we look at it's just an obvious decision, just come back, right? I don't think that people, again, here we go back to trauma. I don't think that we really realize how something is affecting someone.
Mhm.
And when you've grown up, believe me, I wish I could wave a magic wand and say just come back. And the Rabbanim, I promise you, are willing and ready to help them, because they just know, for the ones that have investigated my story, they know what the situation is. But I think the irony is that the books in itself, believe it or not, have moved members of my family in ways that I could have never imagined, because the books in themselves, when we're talking about, especially The Watchmen, the line between fact and fiction is so thin that for someone who comes from this history, it's literally mamish like reading their own story,
Mm,
and I think also what I really think that a lot of people appreciated was that it was a messy book. In other words, like there was real life in it, the family dynamics, the drama. It was in there because this is really what it was like. It was this pool, and even within that, it was what do you deceive yourself with? And I think a lot of people we go through this. We accept certain things. We don't question others. You know, what did we know? What didn't we know? What did we overlook? Right. And I think that that's something that a lot of us go through. Certainly, I went through this myself. And a lot of that, you'll see that in the characters. You'll see that, especially with the main character, who happens to actually be named after one of my ancestral great grandfathers, Rabbi Abraham Senor, who was forcibly converted and took on the name Hernan Perez Coronel. The book in itself, and even the picture of Rabbi Abraham Senor, it's almost like looking at my father. So
mm,
I think even my mom, so she sees this, it's like, it's the uncanny resemblance that they look the same. So, I think that everyone has to come, everybody has their own journey with Hashem, right? And I think so long as I keep living my truth, which, by the way, like Hashem's got me really busy, right? So meddling in what they have to do, like these are personal tikkuns. Mamish, we're all here on a tikkun as well, right? So these are all personal tikkuns that they're fighting through. And I know Hashem is literally working behind the scenes for a lot of people, not just for my family, but a lot of people. Time to time, you check in with some of these families, and they tell you, where their parents, where's their sister, where's this. You think that when you have the light bulb moment, that everyone around you will have it, and that's not always the case. And I think that one of the biggest challenges for any of us, whether you come from this, background or not, is that just because you've had the light bulb moment, may have not, and there are certain things that may be preventing that. And that's between them and Hashem. In Christianity, there was this concept of Bible thumping, right? And so I've learned not to Bible thump. People really, it's like that butterfly trying to emerge. If you help it out, it's not
right.
going to survive. You have to let them struggle through it. The sad side is that you hope that they don't pass on to the true world before knowing that. And I think that that is a risk and a heartache that a lot of conversos do share.
First of all, thank you so much for sharing all that and going really deep with that. I appreciate it. Um, I want to bring us back to the book. And I know we left off on that journey. You were 29, the dream summer, or the summer dreams, and then we got the whole thing with the husband and your brothers and everything else. So now, what prompted? At what moment in time did you say, "Okay, I'm going to write this book"? Like,
Believe it or not, here we go with an experience that was actually on the yard site of Rashi. And I literally I had to tell my Rav about it. He had me record the date, everything. He literally said, "You have to go back to Puerto Rico and sing." I went back to Puerto Rico to investigate my family. Who knew that hidden within the mountains of Puerto Rico was a whole remnant of people who had come from Sevilla, who had come from Portugal, who had never married out? I was shocked that it wasn't a secret. It was like an open secret, though they didn't talk about it. It was an open secret. There were signs everywhere. I mean, this was not ambiguous. It wasn't like, there were practices of mikvahs, everything. And I remember talking to my Rav in real time, sending him pictures in real time. And this in itself was almost like espionage, right? Because you're trying to take pictures without it being so obvious what you're doing, So I'm taking pictures, I'm sending them to the Rav, and he's like freaking out in Queens, and he's like, "Tell them to tell you the truth." And it's like we're all like, I was being shown where mikvahs on the property where hidden mikvahs were. Like this was like mind blowing. And in many ways, it felt like what I would imagine 1492 would have felt. The
mm,
hiding, the secrecy, they had they had ways of communication in the nighttime so that people, from the church couldn't detect it. They're still using today. I actually had the zahut to listen to one of those things. They
Right.
had shechting. The mountain was like dead silent come Shabbos. Like it was like 1492. And I'm having this like moment. And by the way, like you can't just get there, right? It's not San Juan, right? This is not San Juan. You're talking about an isolated place, within the mountains. And everyone that's there is related,
So
just about.
repeat again. What area is that in Puerto Rico? So
So this is in Puerto Rico. It's in the mountains. And ironically enough, within doing the history, it wasn't, there's pockets of these mountains all over Puerto Rico with people who have this. I always say Puerto Rico is infested with Jews. Infested. Like, momish, like, you really, if somebody says I'm from Puerto Rico and they're having this experience, I say, like, there's smoke and there's fire. Check it out, right? Like, there's something.
are there
And
names to the towns? What are the names to these towns?
so it's littered everywhere. It's everywhere. It's not in this just in the South. It's literally everywhere. And by now, even the people, because they're not under as strict of, with the Catholic Church. So they kind of like migrated out. And again, a lot of them now have come here. So so we go there, we find out, and my grandmother's sister, who literally spills the beans on everything, and she says, I want you to go not only to Cordoba, but to Sevilla. And I remember, like, my trip to Sevilla, it was, first of all, Cordoba, between the Juderia and Cordoba, which is the Jewish quarter, and what's left of Sevilla. Now, Cordoba, you still have remnants, right? And I was shocked at how many. It was almost as if the people of Puerto Rico had replicated sections of the Jewish quarter in Cordoba. And then when I went into Sevilla, you would think that there's nothing left, right? Because there's no outward sign that it's a Juderia. There's nothing left of the Star of David, except if you had gone to Puerto Rico, and then you will see, even within I think he's my seventh great grandfather, he replicated the main synagogue in Sevilla. And it's like mind blowing. Like, he replicated the courtyard, the fountain, the actual church, which was confiscated, I think, back in maybe the 1300s, so before even the expulsion. And he doesn't have, architectural plans. He doesn't have Google Maps. He literally replicated this. And ironically enough, it was a church that was housing a lot of these records. They found out about it, and he was roasted with those records, and he actually was martyred. So, there's a lot of history, which, by the way, between the wars, the Dutch, the French, the British, and the Inquisition have all come at Puerto Rico, and a lot of the records were destroyed. And so this has really become a difficulty and a big barrier for a lot of people when they're trying to prove back ancestry. And they're trying to find those records that unequivocally say, this one. And usually, unfortunately, when you're finding that record, it's because it's an Inquisition record, which means there probably was a trial. So a lot of that has been erased. So this is like, it's very difficult. Puerto Rico was one of those areas that, because it was under Spanish rule, they did not have the ability to live freely. So sometimes you go to some of these islands like Curacao and Jamaica, and you will see that there's a richer and what seems like a longer history of Judaism. The only reason why that is because they were not under Spanish rule, and so they weren't under those constraints and were allowed to kind of live freely, as best as they could. Wherever we go, there's always trouble, but not the way it was in Puerto Rico, in Cuba, and these places in South America. That certainly was not the case. So it's been a big challenge for a lot of people, sometimes, to grab those records that say unequivocally, this is who I am, which, of course, a lot of Rabbanim want to see this, right? They want to see this, show me your papers, right? And unfortunately for them, they're not going to be able to do it.
So now, after you visited Puerto Rico,
so I go to Puerto Rico, I go to Spain. And so I come back, and my rabbi says, like, listen, you have to get your story out. And it's so funny because the last time I saw it started as a weekly docuseries, and then I put it in a full part, and then I put it into a book, right? And at the time, we're talking 2019, it definitely wasn't an explosion of conversos coming forward the way they are now. And so, it's funny because you tell your story, but to an extent, it involves other people. There's only so much that you can say, that you feel comfortable saying, because you are involving other people that perhaps may not want to be outed, right? again, we go back to that light bulb moment. You've had it. Doesn't mean everyone else has had it. When we came forward, when my mother had written letters, the customs that they had described were not something that you could Google,
Mm.
right? This was something that had to have come from the Oral Torah, and it had to have been passed down.
Like
This
what?
was
Can you
not
give me an
something you can just
example?
Google.
Can you give me an example?
So one of the things that they still keep, right, is what they call the cuarentena, right? Is when a woman has a baby. And it's funny, we don't even keep that here. And they're
Okay.
kind of isolated, right? There's so many things that they keep over there still that's really like medieval Spanish that
Okay.
they don't even keep over here. And
Right.
for another thing, for instance, for like the women, the women, even if you're unmarried, if you're praying, you're covering your hair. The irony too, it's funny because some of and they still cover, like, I think in Puerto Rico per capita you probably see more women covering their hair than even in like some of the frum places in America, in Israel. You'll probably see more women covering their hair in Puerto Rico than anything. But it's funny because they still use those. I don't know if you know the style, but it's like this old Spanish where it's like this little netting, and
Yeah.
it's like, and they still use this to this day, a lot of them. And my grandmother's sister said that at one point, like in the 60s and the 70s, these more like this style became in style, and then it's like it's back to the old way again. So there's definitely these things. I think what's also very interesting is that it wasn't just women keeping these things; it was the men
Mm-hmm.
as well. Like they have certain areas that are designated. One of them is called Playa de las Mujeres, which is the beach of the women, which is the mikveh for the women. No men are allowed. No boys are allowed. Like this is like really guarded off. It's just for the women. It's funny what I was talking about before. They have these communication things. So you'll in the mountains. It's almost like an amphitheater.
Mm-hmm.
So around 9:30, which it's really dark at that point, right? And now we're talking a place. There aren't billboards. Like if they have a Burger King, chances are you'll see somebody in a horse on the drive-through and somebody parking their horse in the parking spots. Like this is like really, it's an unusual like situation going on over here, right? So they'll make these announcements, and one of the announcements that I was told that they make, especially if somebody's been born, and they say whether it's born in the morning, whether it's born in the night, and then they count 7 days, and they all end up at the public mikvah to kind of celebrate, where the men presents the baby. So they have like these little rituals, really, really amazing. And so, the history of a lot of these people, like my grandmother's sister said, you know, what you do here stays here forever because no one has left. Like no one has left. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's been whoever's here has been here generations now. So it's kind of special in that, and I had the same feeling when I went to Netanya in Israel, where it's very communal, and there's definitely that communal feeling there. But I'll tell you, Mamish, when I showed up there, because I wasn't a regular on the mountain, everyone knew about it. It was
Mm-hmm.
almost like everybody knew there was
Settled.
this stranger, and it's almost like you had to give your credentials, like, no, she's so and so's granddaughter. Okay, cool. And then you didn't know if you were going to get thrown off the mountain because you just didn't belong there. So it's a very isolated place. There are definitely more horses than there are cars. The pace of life is a lot different there. There's no billboards. Um, there are TVs with an asterisk, right? I think more people, they have a TV, it's never plugged in. There's certainly no like cable on it. There's no Wi-Fi. And I remember I was told about the controversy of the first radio that was brought to the mountain. And they almost threw it. It happened to have been like from one of my grandmother's cousins, and they almost threw him off the mountain because they didn't want technology coming onto the mountain as well. So, I mean, this is a place that's
Yeah.
literally, like my mom says, it's frozen in time. And if
Wow.
you forgot the milk, forget it. Like whatever you forgot at the store, forget it. You're gonna go down to the neighbor and ask for something from the cow. You are not like, it just takes too long to get down. So, I went there, went to Spain, did the last Anusa, and then, here we go, the pandemic hits,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which shuts everything down. The book, everything. So all we have, like I think a lot of us become Zoom, right? And so I started these Zoom series and talking to other people who had this ancestry and just really building the stories. I started to do a docu-series called The Remnant, which really talked about um, some of what happened post-expulsion, and then how the Inquisition got into Puerto Rico. Which, by the way, Puerto Rico was said to have the most brutal Inquisition even outside of Spain. And there's Puerto Rico became like the epicenter in the New World for the Inquisition. So it was very dangerous. So we did all these things to remedy. And I said, wouldn't I told my husband, wouldn't it be great? Like, I did my story, I did the stories of others. Wouldn't it be just great to now have the Rabbanim come in and talk about like their view of everything?
Mhm.
And so originally my goal was to produce a documentary called Zahor. And it was, meant to really capture like, the lost history and this and their return and what do you see? Because there's all these prophecies about it. And right away there was trouble.
Mm,
And one of the biggest things that I found troublesome was the use of the word marrano. The word marrano means pig, right?
mm,
And I think that a lot of people are very shocked. A lot of Rabbanim are shocked because they're like, oh my gosh, I used the word marrano like 20 times in my shir, right? So that became, the fact that that wasn't well known and it was a term that just been assigned to crypto Judaism.
mm,
So it's funny because I think some people think that it's a badge of honor within Am Yisrael, right? They're not, it's definitely not something they're saying to be derogatory. But the people that are hearing it are like, oh my gosh, you're calling me like a pig. That was one issue. Even out of speaking to certain people, whether they were scholars, whether they were Rabbanim, there was a thing that was starting to come out, and there was an underlying rift between the communities that had stayed and the communities that had left.
mm,
And part of that rift was not, really because of, um, ideological differences. It was really erroneous information that had been getting passed down. And, I think one of the biggest things that contributed to this was the fact that a lot of Rabbanim had stories that were probably, pre expulsion, maybe up to the expulsion, right? And even those, if you think about it, they come down like telephone. And from time to time, you'll hear them and you hear like the same story said, different versions. It's a real telephone game. But what was becoming apparent was that come August 1st, 1492, it was as if the history had just simply stopped.
mm,
And there was this void that was being created. And it was swallowing the narratives of everyone who had endured past expulsion, right? So, at the end of the day, I realized that I couldn't go forward with the documentary. And so I said that the mission now was no longer about documentation, but it was about restoration. And I
mm,
really felt that the best way to do that was to tell a historical fiction story that not only told um, the history of how the movements, which is a real movement, again, that was born out of necessity, but the drama and the dynamics that someone was personally, what was it like as a converso, fighting, for your identity, fighting for your freedom, fighting for the freedom of others. Nobody says like I want to go and pillage ships and possibly take a life in order to save a bit. Like no one says that, and here we have these people who, for all intents and purposes, were forced into a situation to make decisions. When we talk about coming from this ancestry, I think between myself and my ancestors, um, I think I got the better end of the deal. Though it's an emotional journey to even tell and document and even put into historical fiction, when you really realize what these people went through and you go through the stories and the archives and the history and the records, this was a horrendous ordeal
mhm.
that lasted far longer than I think anyone could have ever imagined.
Right, yeah. I've been to Spain and with the organization that I work with, Olami, and it's the things that we've learned and saw was really much, I would say, very much. People don't realize, to like you said, to the extent of what was going on. But now you have these books out. What has been the feedback, or can you maybe share one or two of your most favorite feedbacks that you've received in reference to the books?
It's funny. I'm not sure if people know there's a Rabbi Daniel Gladstein, and he's really like a Torah giant, in many ways. And he's been one of the greatest supporters of my story, even outside of my Rav. And he's been really involved for the last 10 years. And it was funny because when he read the first one, here's a Torah giant, right? He's like a genius in Torah, and he literally says like this book was riveting. Like I read it cover to cover, and I think that it's a contribution. And I'm thinking, wow, he's not just saying it's a great story. Like he's literally saying, Momish, this is a contribution to our history. And I'm thinking, for someone of that caliber to say something like that about the book, it just, and that was part one. Part one really left you with a cliffhanger, and part two came in with the knockout punch. And I think that what was surprising, even in the read back of it, when I'm going through the editing of it, when you see what's going on with October 7th, how much it really paralleled. And the escape of Clara Rojo really touched on a subject that really had to do with the women, which I think that, there's the story of the Conversos. And again, it's like a broad story. So we never really are emotionally attached to any of it. Well, again, aside from what we don't realize of how far reaching it was, I don't think that we even realized the impact, especially on the women who were trying to escape to freedom and the atrocities that they endured as a result of trying to get free. And unfortunately, this is the theme that continues to this day. Um, and part of going into writing Clara Rojo, you know, this Clara Rojo really pushes your level of emunah and bitachon. And I think that it really humanizes, we're talking about bringing you into the world of what it's like for Rabbi Palachi, who's one of the main characters, to lead a kahal that is coming from such it's a bomb. It's a bomb that's going off on these people's life. What is it like for him? He's lost, a student. What's happening in his mind? We're talking about, family drama, parental alienation. All these things that really do happen are happening in this story. The detail, again, we talked about trauma. This book, I really had to not only take a moment to digest, because again, we're talking about real situations that, this book is inspired by real situations, but I had to take a deep dive into trauma and in order to really capture the moment, and I don't want to give it away, but there's a particular moment at the end with the namesake of Clara Rojo. Um, and I think that people were blown away with the way it was able to be captured, the realism of her trauma. It was and how they helped her to come back. This was a very enduring, humanizing moment that I think a lot of people can relate to, unfortunately. And so it was very important for me to take that with all the weight and seriousness of it to deliver something that I know really will resonate with people. And I'm so glad that it did. Thank God.
Yeah, oh, I'm so happy. If you can meet one other author, whether it be someone that's alive today or not alive today, who would it be that you would love to meet or sit down with, and why?
So it's funny because I really would love to sit down. There's a man called Shlomo Ibn Velga, and he was probably one of the only boots on the ground historian during the Inquisition time, during the expulsion. And I would love to know because he wrote so many things. And I think that when he was writing really what's like a beginning of even, what my journey is, right? I would love to know his perspective, right? Because what do we take away after all these years? What's happened? For me, I felt like that the story, the Watchmen in itself is very much, I don't know if you remember the story of Serach ben Asher, right? Who sang to Yaakov
Yeah,
and
yeah.
said, Yosef lives,
There's a lot,
right?
right?
I really feel that when people understand and realize that the Anusim live, right? It's the Ani Yosef moment, right? That the brothers don't realize that one of our brothers survived, right? Because we're talking about a portion of Shevet Yehuda, right? And I really would love to know what his thoughts are of how far we've come, of how far we've had to go. Were there stories that he knew of that he couldn't write of? Like how much more? I think sometimes even in writing, we lose some of it, right? Like I always say, when doctors learn how to deliver babies or you read a book about what to expect when you're expecting, it's not what you expected when you're expecting.
That's so true.
So I think that sometimes, as much as we try to capture the emotion, we try to capture what's going on, but it never really fully does the job the way experience does. And I really, really, really want to know because there's times that he writes of even certain stories that mamish will leave you bawling on the floor of what the people were going through. Um, and I think that sometimes I know what the emotional toll was for me to write the Watchmen series, and I wonder what it was like for him.
I love that. And I love how you coined it as the Ani Yosef. Thank you so much, Devorah. Before we say goodbye to each other, we could probably go on much longer. Just could you let people know how could they best reach you if they wanted to ask you more questions?
So one, you can always reach me at thelastanusa@gmail.
Okay.
And the books themselves are on Amazon. You can look up my name, Devorah Esther Ivel Colon, and they will all pop up. Um, I really say, what I do love as well. We talked about what has been the feedback. The Rabbanim have really said that this is a history that people should know, and this is a great series for them to get to know this history. I think if you're looking for a page turner, this is definitely it. And what's funny is that a lot of people are saying they definitely saw this as a Netflix or a movie series. So who knows?
Who knows?
Hashem knows what he wants to have happen with all this. But what I would say um, is that we are all looking for the redemption. I can assure you that this is no less part of the redemption. I think that when you study the case of the conversos, there's so much that is to be gleaned from the lessons that learned, especially when you're talking about a movement of people. Mamish, not only thought that they were fighting to safeguard the monarchy of the House of David, but that they were upholding the honor of Hashem in himself. And we're talking about people that risked everything, their life, their liberty, their money, which is really contrary to what the narrative is that they couldn't pass the Nesanyon. Um, so I really say, I think this is a lesson on humanity, definitely on Lashon Hara, right? Like we have to just take a step back sometimes. I hope that we never are put in a situation like this or like October 7th again. I think that Am Yisrael is at a place where we are looking for unity, we are looking for Achdut, and I think that this story really helps for people to understand this growing population within Am Yisrael who are joining. And I really encourage you for no other reason than that this is part of your history as well. It's not just a Converso history; it's the history of Am Yisrael. And I truly believe that when the brothers are reunited, especially both sides of Shevet Yehuda are reunited, I really feel like that will have been the key to open the door that leads to the revelation of Mashiach.
So beautiful. Thank you so much, Devorah Esther.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Looking forward for everyone to hear this riveting, I'll use the word riveting, very much so informative interview and this podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.